Hello, everyone. I'm Susan D'Entremont. I'm the Digital Project Manager at the Capital District Library Council, one of the councils that participates in New York Heritage Digital Collections. I have the New York Heritage website pulled up here, nyheritage.org, and it's a decentralized program where each of the library councils is responsible for their members, helping their members put material into New York Heritage. You can go here and find the institutions that are contributing. And if you are from an institution that is not contributing, but would like to contribute, you can go under For Contributors, How to Join, and this will take you to a page that will show you how to get in touch with the person you need to speak with to help. You'll see that Metro New York, so if you're from the 5 boroughs or Westchester County, they have a different site, Digital Culture of Metropolitan New York, where they can help you put your digitized items up in there. But I encourage you to explore this site, search. There's things are being added pretty much every day, so you never quite know what you're going to come across. So there's a little pitch for New York Heritage. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Jim Gandy. Jim Gandy is the librarian and archivist at the New York State Military Museum and Veterans Research Center in Saratoga Springs, New York. He is also a very active member in the Capital District Library Council, great support to us. He was always willing to speak or use, when we could do this, help invite us into his space for tours or events, and we really appreciate all that he does for CDLC. He is also, well, his institution is one of the most prolific contributors to New York Heritage. He has 5 collections currently in New York Heritage, which he's going to, I'm sure, tell you all about in more detail today, and they contain well over 13,000 items in there. So he's a big player in New York Heritage. So he's going to just give us a little overview of that today. You can, if you have questions for him, you can put them in the Q&A, and I will interrupt him as needed to answer your questions. This is going to be a very informal program today, so you can put your questions in as you have them, and we'll interrupt them. We'll interrupt Jim. I'll interrupt Jim to answer them when appropriate, or we can save some of them to the end as well. You can also use the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat for questions, but if you put them in the Q&A, I will see them more quickly. So without further ado, take it away, Jim.
Hi, thanks, Susan. As Susan said, we have a bunch of stuff in New York Heritage. Most of the work has been done by volunteers. I use volunteers quite a bit. They do basically everything for me. They help me inventory, they help me index collections, they transcribe both oral histories, letters, and diaries. And wait. And they dust. They help me shelve books. They just do about everything. I couldn't survive without volunteers, and I can't wait till they can come back into the building because I have many books that need to be reshelved. As Susan said, we have quite a few things in New York Heritage. We have our oral history collection. We have a yearbook from World War II, the New York Division, the 27th, while they were training down in Fort McClellan. We have diaries.
Jim, I don't know if there's anything you can do about this, but your it says your bandwidth is low and you're sort of freezing up a bit.
I don't know that I can. I'm at work, and I don't know how I can fix that right now.
All right, well, we'll just soldier on and do the best we can.
If it gets really bad, let me know. I can muck around, because that's what I do all day, is I muck around. Yes. So today I was going to speak mostly about two different things: my use of volunteers and our oral history collection, and how we went from having those all on tapes to having them all on YouTube. Um, like I said earlier, I could survive without volunteers, but I couldn't get nearly as much done. My volunteers, so far they've indexed almost 900,000 names into our roster database. They've transcribed about 650 of our oral histories. Um, they've helped me scan over 70,000 photographs. Um, and they're just incredible. I'm so grateful that I have so many volunteers. Um, sorry, I'm nervous.
The remote volunteers, I know people are very interested in how you use volunteers that aren't even in the state or
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Most of my volunteers work remotely. I have not met most of my volunteers. Mostly it's just through email. I used to have a basically a help wanted sign up on our site, but I was told by the National Guard that should come down, because I'm not allowed to actively solicit goods or services, um, except for donations. Um, Basically, how my volunteer started is my stepdaughter needed community service hours for her high school. So I would bring home a stack of index cards that I had scanned, or no, photocopied at that point. This is 2003. And she would just type in names. We have quite a few different collections that lend themselves to this kind of work. Um, and a lot of them, you can't really see this, are on index cards. Um, but we have probably 20 different collections of index cards. So every time I needed to look for a name, I would have to search through 20 different collections. I could narrow it down by time period though. Um, but one of the collections wasn't divided alphabetically, it was divided by numbers from 1 to 203. And I could never figure out what those numbers were for. Um, so it just helps me now because I don't have to search through 20 collections. I can just look into my roster database and find it. The advent of being able to transfer large files over the internet has really made my life much more easy dealing with volunteers. Now I can just scan in a bunch of things and send them a large file. I usually use a third party called WeTransfer.com, and then they work and send me back the results. It's always a bit of a challenge normalizing different people's work on the same project, but it's certainly worth my time doing that. Uh, uh, yes. One of the things that I just bought a couple years ago that I absolutely love is an Epson Scanner. That's the, let me look, I have that there. Nope, nope, nope. It's the Epson Fast Photo FF.680W. And it's incredible because you can just put in as many documents as it'll fit and it'll just scan them and it will crop them automatically. So if you put in index cards, you get an index card size file back, image back. It does photographs. It's not as good as a flatbed scanner, but basically I just use scanning as an access method, not a preservation method. Yes.
So how do you keep track? I know, how do you keep track of when you send material out to the volunteers? Like how many remote volunteers do you have that's doing the transcribing and the indexing and so forth?
Right now I have about 50 projects out there. It used to be more because I used to work with Hudson Valley Community College as part of their community outreach services. But that's kind of tailed off, I think, due to the pandemic. Every semester I would have about 30 or 40 students doing work for me. But I keep track through my database. I use a software system from DB TextWorks called InMagic. And it's fabulous because I can make databases as much as I want and interconnect them as much as I want. So I have a database just for volunteers, a database for volunteer projects, and they link into my cataloging system. So I know who is doing what. Yeah, so.
And do you put material into New York Heritage or, whatever system you're using and then have it transcribed, or do you wait until you have the whole package before putting it up online and make it available to the public?
I wait until the project is done, or yeah, and then I put the digital images online once I have all the data involved in that.
Okay. And we do have a question from the audience. Julia asks, how do you have the remote volunteers return their transcriptions to you, and what do you do with the transcriptions once you have them back?
It's all done through email, and it depends on what they're working on. If they're working on a diary, then I just put that transcription right into the catalog record with the diary. If they're working on an indexing project, then I just add that to, that's usually an Excel spreadsheet that I can then crosswalk over into our database.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, thank you. I think that answered everything. And if you have further follow-up questions, Julia, you can just put them in the Q&A.
Yeah.
I don't think she does, so go ahead.
Okay. So
actually, we have another question from
please.
Kathleen Delaney. Do you have procedures or policies in place for volunteers to follow? There's actually several questions, so I can repeat them if you like. Do you have procedures or policies in place for volunteers to follow? How do you verify the information that the volunteers are inputting? And do they have to sign an agreement of confidentiality or agree not to share the documents with other institutions? So do you want me to take that one at a time?
Yeah, but I'll go backwards.
Okay.
Everything we have is, since we're a state institution, is public unless it's copyrighted. So I don't worry about confidentiality, because anything of a confidential nature doesn't come to us. It goes to the state archives. We're part of the National Guard. So anything with social security numbers or anything recent goes right to the state archives, and they hold it until it's ready to be released to the public. As far as verifying the information, I do have to verify the work from the community college students much more than for my other volunteers, mostly because they're just doing one project and that's it. And I've noticed that some people cut corners. So you just have to look at the length of the transcription as in relation to the length of the interview, and you can pretty much figure out if they've actually done it all. But I don't go back and I don't read word for word with the oral history video itself. I just don't have the time. I just Mostly I put it through a spell check and make sure they've got the proper nouns correct. Because a lot of especially in the Pacific during World War II, the islands and the battles are difficult to sound out. And then there was one other question, but I forget.
Do you have the policies, procedures, or policies in place for volunteers to follow?
Yeah, every volunteer, when they first start, gets a packet of either how to transcribe different media, whether it's diaries, letters, or oral histories. I also have a worksheet I've generated to help people index collections. So, but once I get to know a volunteer, I'm much less likely to go through and check their work. The first few times I'll give it a quick glance, but after that, I'll just import it into my database.
And you do this for you've done this sort of thing for all your collections in New York Heritage, right? You have Civil War diaries in there, you have oral histories, you have enlistment cards, and some of those, like the cards, are people mainly using that for genealogy? Are they mainly looking for names, or do you have them transcribe everything that's on there?
For the cards, most of my questions are genealogy related. Um, they're either about a person or a particular unit. So the nice thing about having a database is that I can look for everybody who served in a particular company in a particular regiment. Yes, but with the exception of the oral histories, which I had to do myself, all the work up on New York Heritage was done by volunteers.
Well, that's a good segue into the oral history section of this program. You have many, many oral histories in there and in New York Heritage, and you are one of our first institutions to put in oral histories. And I know that you didn't do the oral histories, but if you just give a little history of the oral history project, and then how they got it, how you got them into New York Heritage, and how you did the workaround about putting them also in YouTube.
Of course. When I first started at the museum in 2002, we had 2 oral historians, and that was their job, is just to go out and interview people and keep track of everything. When they retired, I was given all of their stuff and told to deal with it, handle it. We have about just over 2,300 oral histories. And at sometime in the early, like 2012, 2013, I started getting quotes to transfer them from their current format, which were mostly mini DVs or VHS or CDs or DVDs. We also had a smattering of a half dozen others. I started getting quotes to do all this for me. And they came back in the range of $25,000. And we just don't have that. The reason it was so expensive, everyone explained, is because they had to do it in real time. There was no way to put a VHS tape into a machine, hook it up to a computer, and have it do it at high speed. It just had to be done in real time. There was no way I was ever going to get that kind of money. So I just went out to Amazon. I bought a $30 or $40 thing called an August something or other. And it's nice because it has both an S reader and the RGB. Is that what it is? No, it isn't it. It's the RCA connectors, red, yellow, and white. And basically I can hook this up to just about anything. And in late 2014, I just started converting them all to a digital format using that little contraption. It took me about 2 years. Every day I'd come in, I'd put one in, it would finish, I'd stop, I'd put, just serially. It was kind of interesting because I heard a lot of really great stories while I was working. So it took me about 2 years. And the nice thing about that is now they're not only on, they're on YouTube, but the links are on New York Heritage, so people can get them both ways.
The thing that's great is in New York Heritage, you're allowed a lot more metadata and cataloging. So I think people find them that way. And then there's a link right in there to YouTube. So people find that watching them in the familiar format of YouTube is easier. And they can, and are the interviews, if I remember correctly, are from many different conflicts. Is that correct? Like what time period are the interviews from? In terms of where they served, when the people served.
Yes, most are World War II. And we have like a half dozen World War I interviews, but those are on audio cassette. And then we have a lot of Vietnam. We have some Korea. And we don't have that many from the current conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because most of those people were done serving after we had stopped actively collecting oral histories. So they all, 20th century conflicts we pretty much have.
Okay. And do you know if there are plans in place to do an oral history project with the Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans?
There's not. Until we get funding to hire another oral historian, we just don't have the resources to do it on a formal basis. One of our oral historians does it on a volunteer basis, but he's going to move up to Canada pretty soon, so we're going to lose even him. So
this is taking you away from the collections, but there's a question here from Christina that I think a lot of people may be interested in. Can you talk a bit more about how the archive is connected with the National Guard? I'm fascinated that they can ask you not to solicit help. And before we made the webinar live, Jim and Ryan and I were talking about how Jim serves several masters in this job. So if you could just explain kind of the way your the governance, I guess, of your institution.
Yeah. Well, the collection was started in 1863. All of New Yorkers were coming home from the Civil War, and a lot of them had stuff they confiscated, looted, stole, took, use your verb, and they wanted someplace to put that. We have marriage certificates from when South Carolina was still a colony. Some soldier probably just went into a courthouse and took them. One of our diaries is from a captain from a Virginia unit. I forget which one offhand. But the interesting thing, an aside, the interesting thing about that diary is that I didn't know there were bits in it that were in a code or a cipher until we transcribed it. And then we've reached out to a professor down in the city university system. I forget which one, Bachman. His name was Bachman. But he actually went through and he deciphered all the bits that were in code. So that was kind of neat. So soldiers were coming back. They wanted some place to put their things, their photographs, their letters, their everything else. And so the state set up the Bureau of Military Statistics that was part of the state militia forces at the time. And we're just the descendant of that. So we're part of the National Guard. State law says that the National Guard, or what it's called is the Division of Military and Naval Affairs, has to have their own historical agency, and we're that. So we're part of the National Guard, so we have to follow all of their regulations. We're part of the state, so we have to follow all of the state's regulations. So getting anything done, it's much easier to get forgiveness than permission. So.
Thanks, Jim. That is actually, I have not heard that whole explanation before, so that's really helpful to me. We have a technical question here from Danielle. She says, do you have playback equipment for all of the different formats, or did you have to rent or purchase any in order to digitize everything?
Well, the nice thing about the mini DVs, probably about 60 or 70% of our histories were on the mini DVs. I could just use the camera that it was recorded on to play it back into the computer. But the VHS, we've got a half dozen VHS machines around. We have a few U-matic machines. Occasionally, I will run into a format that I don't have, like a compact VHS or the high 8s. And that I would take down to a company in Albany on Central Ave. I forget what it's called, but they would just convert it for me. So, and their rates were reasonable. They also did all of my 16 millimeter films.
Great, thank you, Jim. And you also have, and for non-audiovisual material, you also have an oversized scanner, I believe, because we have had members who've had one or two things, and you have been kind enough to let them use that too. So what other types of equipment do you have for digitizing material for New York Heritage?
The scanners, we have two 11 by 17 Epson scanners. We have the fast photo Epson I spoke of earlier. I don't think we have much else, but yeah.
Well, that's more than most of our members, so we appreciate you sharing your expertise and your equipment. Okay.
And the great thing about the scanners is you can use Photoshop to stitch together photos that are way too big for a scanner. So I have a couple hundred panoramic photographs or unit photographs that are about 3 feet long that I just scan them in sections and Photoshop will just stitch them together.
And do you have a sense of which collections are the most popular that you have digitized and made available to the public?
The oral history I was just looking at our YouTube stats the other day, and since we started, they say that the watch time is 1.3 million hours. So those apparently get viewed a lot. And that, and probably just our index card collections that genealogists can just sort through.
Okay. Well, we've been going for about half an hour. So if people have other questions for Jim that on anything that he talked about or the museum in general, and as you can see, he is, maybe you can't see, but he's in the basement, just like a lot of libraries and archives. So if you've been to the military museum in Saratoga Springs, you probably did not see Jim or the library at all, because he's a bit hidden. But once they open, which I think you said that's unknown at this point when that will be, it's a great museum. They change their exhibits, and they also do some wonderful programming. So I would encourage anyone that is going to the races or going to a concert or whatever to get there a little early and go to the military museum. But if people have, again, questions or comments, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will pass them along to Jim.
It is a great place. The curators have done a wonderful job on the exhibits. We're in an old armory, and my kids used to play basketball on the main floor, and you can't even tell that that was even possible. We are free, and it's nice and cool in August, so please come on in.
Okay, let's see. We have a question. Do you have any oral histories on YouTube that don't have a video component? And if so, how do you post? Do you put a static image up there? Or how do you do that?
We have about 150 audio cassettes that that we got up on YouTube by just putting a static image of, it's actually the 165th waiting ashore on Macon during World War II. So you just see this one picture while the audio plays. We also, in our oral history, I tape everything as an MPEG. I convert it to an MP4 to put it up on YouTube, but I also rip an MP3 out of it and I can post that. I did post it on SoundCloud, which worked for a while until the state budget fell apart and I couldn't renew my subscription. So that was a mistake. I wouldn't use SoundCloud again.
So those things are just, you can't access them at all now.
I cannot access them at all. It's quite frustrating.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Another question, do you keep historic records of the New York State National Guard armories that may have been decommissioned or torn down?
Yes and no. The military museum is in charge of all historic property in every armory throughout the state. So the curators are constantly traveling. Later this month, I'll be going down to New York City to start cataloging or continue cataloging the collection at the Lexington Avenue Armory on 37th Street. So when an armory is about to close, we go in there and we take out everything we can find. So yes, we do have records, but if an armory is destroyed, then we don't keep track of it once it's out of the state system. Like the armory in Amsterdam was sold to a private individual. We don't know anything about it at this point.
Okay, another question. I know you said there's not currently funding for oral histories from Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you take transcripts of original diaries or letters sent from previous conflicts? Classic example, someone finds the grandfather's letters in the attic. So do you accept other materials from those conflicts?
That's a tough one. I love transcripts. They're so much easier to read. Um, the problem is that when I get a researcher in, they like transcripts, but they need to see the original documents to make sure that the transcription's accurate. So while I will take a transcript and I always ask for copies of the originals as well. It doesn't have to be the original, but like a photocopy or an image would be great. I've I've gotten to the point where unless I can get those, I don't really accept just transcripts.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I hadn't thought of that. But you definitely are collecting things from contemporary or recent veterans in your collection.
Yes, the problem with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars though is that all of that was digital. Soldiers don't send letters home. They send an email or a text. And there's just no way to capture that easily.
Okay. Any other questions for Jim before we wrap up our lunchtime bits and bytes, New York Heritage bits and bytes? And if not, I don't know if Ryan Perry from New York Heritage has any announcements for the group. I know there will be upcoming bits and bytes webinars, but I'm not sure if any are scheduled yet for the next month.
We don't have our next one scheduled, but it'll be probably sometime in June or maybe July, depending on who we find and when they're available. But this is very interesting. Thank you so much, Jim and Susan, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Jim. And I see that Karen from Albany is giving you thanks, Jim. Jim is also an active member of our preservation interest group at CDLC, and I encourage people to join that, especially now that we're virtual, because we have a lot of talk about how to preserve the things like the video, like the audio, all the sorts of things that Jim was highlighting today. All right. Oh, and just lots of thanks in the chat. So thank you, Jim.
Well, it was great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, if there's no more announcements, watch your emails. I know Ryan always puts it on Nylon, and we send it out through our various council listservs as well. Watch for the next our next institution that we will highlight.
Wonderful.